Well, if there is one thing that is seemingly true of most kids is that they don't like to try new foods. How many of you are picky eaters? Raise your hand. Don't be shy. It's okay. I know there's more of you because I've seen the requests that you make, okay? Picky eaters, I know what that's like. I live with probably three of them. My wife's a pretty picky eater too. And so a lot of times we get things just plain. I don't know if you like, here's an example, right? If you go and get pizza, do you just get like cheese or pepperoni, or are you the type of person that's like, it's like all the stuff on it, right? You know, I live with my kids, they just want cheese. That's all they want. And so sometimes we have this thing where we're a little afraid of the unknown. Now, my kids, they're afraid of sauce. Like, they tell me they don't like ketchup, right? And they've never had ketchup before, but they just tell me they don't like it because they don't want to try it. They're afraid of it. Same with we beg them over and over again to try Chick-fil-A sauce because it's like the greatest thing in the world, right? But they're just scared of it, right? Yeah, shout out. I know like 5-10 of you work at Chick-fil-A. So, but you know, the little bit of the unknown, like our perception of things when we don't know them, can alter how we treat them, right? So I think of that with food. Now let's move off of food for a second and think of this question. How do you view other people in your life? Okay? Maybe people that you don't know very well. Maybe people that you just walk by or see or just on the outskirts. How do you view other people in your life that you don't know very well? What is your perception of them? That's really what I want to spend some time talking about, because what I believe is our perception of people will shape how we treat them. Now, we're going to start this series called The Summer of the Other, and this is where we'll be all of June, all of July, and we're going to talk about our attitude and our actions really towards other people, specifically not your best friends, right? Not your friend group, but other people outside of your closest circle, your view of them, how you treat them, all those type of things. And it's going to start with our perception, is what we're going to talk about tonight, our perception of other people. I don't know, how many of you have seen the TV show Lost? Yes. Okay, like a few of you, but not many, so which means I'm old, okay? So, oh yeah? All right, yeah, you're old too, just like me. Okay, so Lost is a great TV show, but like, I don't want to ruin it for you because maybe someday you'll find yourself watching it, but all these people end up on this remote island, and they think they're by themselves, but they quickly realize that they're not by themselves, and they just call the other people others, right? And they're scared of the others. They're actually terrified of them. And their perception of the others, what they think about them, even though they don't know them, affects how they treat them. And so a couple seasons of the thing is like dealing with the others and how they treat them and all that type of stuff. Now, I wonder sometimes if we think about this in our life, our perception of the people that we don't know or that we don't know well, if we were to be a little bit more Christ-like in how we perceived people, how we saw people, I think we'd be better off. Because if we don't have a Christ-like attitude or perception of people, then we risk the opportunity that we're going to set ourselves up for a lifetime of selfishness and negativity, just living in our own little circle, our own little bubble. And I don't think that's what Jesus wants for us. I want to invite you to open up your phones to the Bible app if you have that on your phone. Every week at Engage, we put all of our notes inside the Bible app. And so if you ever just want to follow along or have it there way, if your mom or your dad asks you what you learned, you got it right there. But all the scriptures and points and stuff is right there. And also there's images that you can use if you want to share with somebody or something like that. But just go to the events part and you can find Engage on there and all that kind of stuff. I just want to let you guys know about that. Now, what we're going to do as we talk about perception, okay, we're talking about our perception of other people, is kind of look at what Jesus, not only what he said and what he taught, but what he did and how he treated people and what we can learn from that. And that's where I want to spend our time tonight. You know, Jesus spent some time with Pharisees. These were the religious leaders of the time, and they were people that often had a negative perception of other people, right? They were very prideful about themselves and how they lived, and it altered their view of other people and how they treated them. And so one time, Jesus, he's catching on to this, and so he tells a parable. He tells a story. I want you to follow along with me in Luke chapter 18. This is what it says. To some who were confident in their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all I get." But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now, this is a very important parable for us to understand what Jesus is teaching here. There's a couple different ways that we could take this, but there's one way that we can understand what Jesus was talking about is our perception of other people that are around us. There's two dichotomies here of what Jesus is showing. Someone who does it right and someone who does it wrong, right? The guy who does it wrong is the Pharisee, and then the guy seemingly who does this right is the tax collector. So I want to show you some truths tonight, some principles that we can live by, and things that we need to understand to help us to have a good perception of other people. Here's the first one, is that how you see others is important to Jesus. So a truth that we need to wrestle with, that we need to understand, because maybe if you're like me, because I lived like this for a while, is I believe that as long as, no matter what I thought about somebody or what I felt about somebody, as long as I didn't say it, right, or as long as I wasn't mean to them, then it didn't really matter. And I lived like that for a long time until I really understood the ways of Jesus, where he shows us it's not just about what you say and how you treat people, but it's also how you perceive them on the inside, how you feel about them on the inside. Now, think about this. This was a made-up story, right? You guys know what parables are. A parable is not, this actually did not happen, but Jesus was telling the story to reveal a truth that he wanted us to understand. And so here's what we read at the very beginning of the text. This is so important. Luke tells us this. He says, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable." So what we're understanding is that Jesus understood that people were looking down on others, right, in a prideful way, and they believed that they were better. They were confident of their own works. And so in that, in understanding of how they were perceiving themselves against other people, he told this parable. That's the context of why Jesus tells this story. He knew that they had pride in their hearts. And so I believe it's important for us to understand that how you see others in your life is important to Jesus. He cares. And I wonder how you judge yourself on that. Like if you were to scale yourself on a 1 to 10 on how well you perceive others, like what do you feel like you have a self-righteousness or you have pride inside, like I feel like I'm better than most people, or maybe you don't. I don't know how you would judge yourself on that, but it's important to understand that Jesus does care about this. He does care about how you see and view people on the inside. So, do you find yourself looking down on people? Do you find yourself perceiving yourself as more important or smarter or whatever you want to fill in the blank? I think that sometimes we all do this, all right? So, don't feel bad if you sit here and be like, man, I don't have this together. It's okay, right? I think that we all struggle with this on some level, but it's a dangerous way to live because Jesus never approved of seeing people or viewing people in this way. And so before we move on to what else I want to share with you tonight, I want us to realize this reality, because nothing else matters if we don't get this, is that how you see other people is important to Jesus. And so you should care about this, right? Jesus cares about your head. He cares about your heart. He cares about what's going on the inside of you, not just what comes out on the outside, okay? So here's the second thing I want you to understand, and here's why this is ultimately important, because how you see others affects how you treat them, right? This is not rocket science, but we got to grasp this. How you see them will affect how you treat them. Now, you notice in this parable that the Pharisee, how he views the tax collector actually affected how he treated and what he did. And you've noticed in the text, it says that he stood at a distance, like he physically distanced himself from the tax collector. He didn't want to be near him as he prayed this righteous prayer. God, thank you for not making me like that person, okay? I hope you never pray a prayer like that, because what Jesus is revealing is that that's not a good way to view other people in your life. And so this prayer affected the way that he treated him. And I know that this is true, and I know this is a struggle because I deal with this in my life. And I imagine that you do as well, is that how we see people, how I see people, let me make it about myself for a second, how I see people and how I view people affects how I treat them. Sometimes I view people and I have my own perception, or understanding of why they are the way they are, or, or whatever it is, and it affects how I treat them, how open or willing I am to have a conversation with them. So if I know it's true for me, it's got to be true for you, which is a little sad. And so I want you to think about this for a second, because it could be true in your life. Does your perception of people sometimes prohibit you from interacting with them? Maybe at lunch, at school, or who you sit with at a sporting event, or maybe even worse, when you come in here. You say, well, I'm not going to sit by them, or I'm not going to sit, or I'll wait until I know somebody who gets here. All those type of things, although you may seem like harmless, right? Well, I just want to sit with my friends. That's not a bad thing, okay? But all those type of things kind of feed into this idea of how we perceive people, and it affects how we treat them. And that's dangerous. And so we have to begin to see people in a little bit of a different way. The truth is we're not perfect. We don't have this together. We have room to grow, and that's what I want us to see. It can affect how we treat people. Now, this is what Jesus taught. Jesus taught this parable, and there's a couple different ways that we could take this, but one of the ways is that you recognize that the tax collector and the Pharisee, how they perceived each other was different. The Pharisee perceived himself as more important, and so it affected the way that he even spoke and prayed about this other person. That's what Jesus taught. But what did Jesus model for us? Because it's important to recognize with everything that we learn about Jesus, not only did he just teach us, but he showed us. And so there's a story that we read. Actually, it's the next chapter in the Gospel of Luke, in chapter 19. It's the story of Zacchaeus. You guys are familiar with the story of Zacchaeus. Do you know the song? This was a wee little man was he? Great. All right, perfect. Okay. We're not going to do the rest. But here's the problem with that song is that sometimes we just think Zacchaeus was just a short little man, right? A wee little man. But we forget that actually Zacchaeus also was a tax collector. He was a wealthy tax collector, but he was short as well. And so if you know the story, maybe you don't, Zacchaeus learns that Jesus is traveling to his town and he wants to see him. So he climbs up a sycamore tree, right? You guys know the song. Okay. He climbs up this tree to see Jesus. And when Jesus gets there, he calls Zacchaeus by name. He tells him to come down from the tree because he's going to go to his house and eat with him. And when Jesus does this, everybody who is there is shocked. And they're honestly a little upset. In fact, this is what we read from Luke chapter 19, verse 7. It says, all the people saw this, and they began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. And this is dangerous because this is what Jesus talked about. Their perception of Zacchaeus affected how they treated him. Now, sure, Zacchaeus was a short man. He was a tax collector. He cheated people out of their money, right? Zacchaeus was not a popular person. In fact, if he were around today, we would probably distance ourselves from him. We would probably also call him a sinner. And so they wonder and they began to think, what? Jesus is supposed to be religious. He's supposed to be like the one that's got this all figured out. Why is he eating with a sinner? Why is he eating with a tax collector? Like they're the worst of the worst. They're traitors. What good can come out of spending time with somebody like that? That was probably their view. That'd probably be our opinion if he was around today. But here's what I want you to see. Jesus didn't let public opinion shape the way that he saw anyone. Right? No matter what everybody else saw, right? Did not affect the way that Jesus saw Zacchaeus and the way that Jesus treated Zacchaeus. In fact, first of all, that's true for you as well. No matter what people think about you or what they say about you, whatever the public opinion is about you, Jesus' opinion of you is not shaped by that. He loves you. He cares for you. I want you to know that. But also, the way that Jesus saw Zacchaeus ultimately changed the way that everybody saw Zacchaeus. Right? When Jesus called him by name out of that tree, everyone else slowly began to see Zacchaeus a little bit differently because of the way that Jesus did. And what's maybe even more important than that, because of the way that Jesus saw Zacchaeus, it ultimately changed the way that Zacchaeus saw himself. If you know the rest of the story, Zacchaeus, his whole life was changed that day. He sold everything. He started to give back to the people that he felt like he cheated or he robbed. And Jesus said, salvation has come to this house today because of the way that Jesus saw him. It was different than everybody else. And the way that Jesus saw him affected the way that he treated him. And we can learn some truths from this because it's so important. How you see someone changes the way that you treat them. And so it takes us back to understand that how you see people is important. Everyone else saw a traitor, a short man, a greedy man. Jesus saw someone with value, intrinsic value, someone who is made in God's image. And that affected the way that Jesus treated him. You can do this. You have to do this to become a mature follower of Jesus, is you have to begin to see people with a little bit of a different lens and to understand that everyone that you meet is made in God's image, has value, and that you can begin to form your opinion around those type of things rather than the public opinion. Because the truth is this, I want you to understand this. Until you begin to see people the way that Jesus sees people, you'll never be on the same mission that Jesus was. We talk here at Engage a lot about going outside of yourself and sharing your faith and being the light to other people in your school or whatever it is. The more you come around here, you'll realize those are the things that we care about. We want you to be those things. But until you begin to see people the way that Jesus did, you won't be on the same mission that he was. I need you to understand that. It's important. So we have to see people through a different lens because Jesus was for everyone. The gospel is for everyone. And when we believe those things, we see people differently. Here's the last thing I want you to see. We'll close with this. When our perception of others is Christ-like, we'll be humble. Okay? This is what it comes down to because when we begin to see people as Jesus does, we'll humble ourselves and we will treat them differently. We'll humble ourselves in our minds. So did you notice how the verse ended in Luke chapter 18? It says this, "For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." There is no better example of this than how Jesus lived this out. Because he humbled himself, it led to his death on the cross, and ultimately that led to his exaltation above everybody else, right? You can read that all throughout Scripture. But here's what I want you to see. When you begin to see people how Jesus wants you to, like through his lens, you will humble yourself and you will begin to treat them differently. But it starts with your perception. I want you to think about this because it's a simple idea, but what do I want you to do with all this? There's an important verse I want you to see in Romans chapter 3 that kind of spells this out for us. Listen to it. I'm going to read it slowly, okay? Romans chapter 3 says this, "We are made right with God by placing our faith in Jesus Christ. And this is true for everyone who believes, no matter who you are. For everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. Yet God, in his grace, freely makes us right in his sight. And he did this through Christ Jesus when he freed us from the penalty of our sins." Man, that is such an important verse. If there was one thing that you could highlight in your Bible app or something, it is those words, because what it communicates to us is this gospel truth that no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've become, no matter any of those things, we're all in the same boat. Every single one of us, students and adults, your parents, your grandparents, we're all in the same boat. We are all sinners who need grace. We are all sinners who need Jesus. And the sooner that we realize those things, our perception of other people changes. Because now the person to your right and to your left are in the same situation that you are. You're not perfect, right? No matter how much you want to exalt yourself above someone else or think that you are better than other people, we're all sinners who need Christ. So the person to your left and to your right and the person behind you, your small group leader, we're all in the same boat. We need Jesus. And when you do that, you humble yourselves. And then it can affect the way that you treat people. If we were all to view people with this lens, someone that Jesus gave his life for, I wonder what would be different. Here's what I think is important. This mattered to Jesus, that his leaders and his people would begin to see people the way that he sees them, because he spent considerable effort to make sure that Peter and Paul, two of the early church leaders, understood this truth. He gave Peter a miraculous vision to help him to understand nothing is unclean. We are all the same. And Paul, we all know Paul's story. Paul's life was turned around to help him to realize that the grace that he experienced on the road to Damascus ultimately led to the grace that he preached for the rest of his life. That we're all sinners, that we all need Jesus, and that he died for us. So here's what I want you to understand. Take a picture. Remember this, is this. Seeing people like Jesus did is the first step to treating people like Jesus would. Okay? If you want to live out your faith, if you want to treat people like Christ would, this is the first step, is to begin to see people like Jesus would. And so when you walk into your schools or when you walk in to a room or you're around some people and there's a Zacchaeus there who's an outcast, who everybody kind of dislikes and doesn't want to be around and has an opinion about who he is and what he's done, maybe your perception begins to change. You say, how would Jesus see this person? What would Jesus see in this person? And maybe you begin to treat people differently. When we see people like Jesus, we see the world how God sees the world.